No longer will large-scale aggression be ignored, or hidden, or condoned. It will be met in kind and with overwhelming force. We will strike as lightning strikes the earth. Today on the Comic Book Report, Thunderbolts Red Omnibus. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning into the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I've prepared another Marvel Omnibus review for you all. That's right, we're taking a look at the Thunderbolts Red Omnibus. This is that Thunderbolts run by Daniel Way, Charles Soule, Ben Acker, and Ben Blacker that came out a dozen years ago or so. Anyway, this is a really interesting run and I cannot wait to discuss it today. Before we dive in though, I do want to shout out and say thank you to our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions like this omnibus here, I encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and while you're there, if you see anything you like, you can use my discount code at checkout and save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's omnibus review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Daniel Way, Charles Soule, Ben Acker, and Ben Blacker, and illustrated primarily by Steve Dillon, Phil Noto, Gabriel Hernandez, and more. The comics in this volume were published by Marvel Comics beginning in 2012. The volume itself collects Thunderbolts, the 2012 series, issues 1 through 32, and Thunderbolts Annual 2013, issue 1. This is an oversized hardcover edition with glossy print paper stock, a sewn binding, and a total of 744 pages. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that omnibus. This is the standard edition cover for this release. There was a direct market cover as well. I'll go ahead and throw up a quick thumbnail so you can check that out and compare the two. But overall, I really like the cover design for this omnibus. They're calling it the Thunderbolts Red, even though the actual title of the comic series collected is just Thunderbolts. This is in reference to that shared red costuming kind of motif that they use. Even characters that don't always have red on their costume, like Punisher and Agent Venom, kind of got a red suit going on for the team. The spine of the omnibus as well is a nice white with a little bit of red thrown in there. We got a nice little crosshair kind of reticle in the corner, and we got a picture of the Red Hulk at the bottom, who is the team leader. The direct market cover could have a bottom picture that's a little bit different than Red Hulk here, but I'm not sure. And the back cover of the dust jacket, all red with some white and black there. Get a little bit of description of the book, what it includes, pricing information, a nice picture as well of the team. And we do have a parental advisory. In this case, that advisory is predominantly for violence, blood, things like that. So that's something to be aware of. It is a little bit more explicitly violent than some of the other Marvel titles, but nothing too gruesome, at least I thought so. But again, your discretion advised, of course. Spending one more minute on this dust jacket, I'm going to go ahead and open it all the way up. We're going to see the inside flaps, and I'll go ahead and spread it all open so you can see this entire dust jacket opened and at one glance. Overall, I'd say Marvel did a really fantastic job with this dust jacket, especially for the standard cover here. I really love it. The black, white, and red, it just really pops out. I think the spine is really nicely done as well. Overall, I don't really have any comments for the dust jacket other than I really enjoyed it. Now, as we begin to transition to the hardback book itself, I will say I was a little let down that we didn't get more of a full art print, maybe a wraparound or a scene from a fight in the book. I think that would have been really nice. Instead, we have a bright red hardback book with the Thunderbolts Red kind of logo for this collection, as well as a lot of kind of faux bullet holes all throughout the front, spine, and back. I think that this is still a really sleek, simple-looking hardback design, but like I said, I would have loved to see a little bit more art from the collection. But still a stylish hardback book itself, but I just think I was hoping for a little bit more. And with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and transition to a look at the binding. So as I mentioned, this is sewn binding, and overall, my collection laid open quite well. I had a little bit of an eye, there was maybe a little bit of gutter loss, but nothing too critical. I actually think that this was really well bound, and coming in under 800 pages, it did open up pretty well. This isn't an over large omnibus. I think it was a really good size, not too cumbersome, and I liked the binding. Okay, and with all of this out of the way, we can jump into the collection proper. And as we open this collection, we can see that we have the title page, publication information, and then we have, in lieu of a table of contents, we have this kind of creator breakdown page that talks about who wrote what issues, who penciled, who maybe did the inking, coloring, basically your creative staff for these issues. That's all broken down. We don't have an issue table of contents numbered section, unfortunately, but that's really not too uncommon with these modern Marvel omnibuses. But the creative index is still nice to kind of get an idea of who wrote what and who's behind the book. But then we jump right into the first issue of this Thunderbolts volume. If you don't know, this omnibus contains this full run. What I mean by that is that this Thunderbolts team forms, does all their missions, and then kind of disbands by the end of this volume. So this chunk where you have just these characters and the Thunderbolts, it's for the duration of this omnibus. So I personally think this is in the category of a one and done kind of book. And I honestly think that's a really good selling point for this book, is that you have kind of a single experience reading it. Even as you change writers 2 or 3 times over the course of this omnibus, there is still this singular team dynamic, and I do like that we have a resolution by the end of this book. But let's go ahead and set the stage for this Thunderbolts team. So this is the Thunderbolts Red Omnibus, and all the team members have kind of a red uniform aspect to them. They're led by the Red Hulk himself, Thunderbolt Ross, but they're never referred to as the Thunderbolts Red, nor is Thunderbolts Red the name of the comic. It's just Thunderbolts, but that's a convenient way to remember this team. And the team ostensibly for most of the run is, as I mentioned, Red Hulk, Elektra, Agent Venom, who's Flash Thompson, the Punisher, Deadpool, and then we have a couple other inclusions throughout this omnibus as well. As you know, this is kind of a spoilery review, so I will say other additions to the team are kind of part of the team. We have the leader from the Hulk franchise, that villain, and we actually do have Johnny Blaze's Ghost Rider toward the back end of this book. There are a couple notable other characters throughout this book, but that is really your main team throughout this omnibus. And honestly, I think the characters are a huge draw for this title. I know you can see them all on the cover, and I think that this for me was something that set this book apart. This is really what drove the interest for me. I like characters like the Punisher or Venom, Deadpool, Elektra. I didn't personally know too much about Red Hulk. I'm not a huge Hulk fan yet, although I'm hoping to become more so as I get into more and more Hulk comics. But the rest of the characters for sure, I was really interested in reading a title that had all of them as part of a kind of darker ops kind of team. And I think that overall, even with all these great characters, I would say that the execution maybe doesn't live up to the high bar the characters might lead you to assume. And that's not to say this collection is without merit. I think that there were plenty of really great stories here. I did say it does change hands a little bit with the writers throughout this, the artist as well. I don't think we get a ton of consistency with any creators throughout this book. Like I said, it does shuffle quite a bit. So if you're hoping for kind of artistic consistency, you might not get that. I know we start the collection with art from Steve Dillon, who I believe was the artist on Preacher. It's a very, very recognizable style. But before long, we shift to another artist, and we just keep right on going. I know Daniel Way wrote the beginning of this omnibus as well, but I think it's under Charles Soule, who wrote really the mid portion of this omnibus, that I really thought this run hit its stride. And then capping off this run, we have written by Ben Acker and Ben Blacker, and I thought those issues were just kind of okay, but I really do think overall this omnibus peaked right around in the middle for me. Let me go back though and talk a little bit about the stories presented in this omnibus. The first major arc, we basically have the Red Hulk assembling his team of Thunderbolts to basically prevent bigger disasters, to kind of clean up his messes, and to do a lot of these sort of mission-based jobs throughout the world. So he kind of goes about recruiting the different members of his squad, who I outlined earlier, and I think that the first issue or so that introduces him kind of recruiting each of the members, it was really effective. I really liked it. I thought it was a fantastic setup for the book. I think particularly the stuff with Frank Castle I thought was really really noteworthy. But that really establishes this really dysfunctional team. You know, the Thunderbolts in history or, you know, a collection of sometimes villains or outcasted characters who banded together for the greater good. It's not quite like a Suicide Squad, but it's maybe in a similar vein, the kind of rogue superhero team that does a lot of mercenary kind of like missions or black ops work. I like the novelty of the eclectic nature of the team members here, like I mentioned earlier. That was a huge driver for me in this. But I think that the first arc or so is a little bit kind of messy. It almost feels like it's utilized more to really have Thunderbolt Ross and the kind of whole Gamma Hulkness of everything on the front burner. Also to introduce the leader into the team. I feel like that first story or arc or two really helped just introduce those facets of this mythos. But even with all these great characters, we didn't get all the interactions I was hoping to, at least in the beginning of this book. I think as we began to gradually make our way through more and more missions, though, I was charmed by a lot more of the interactions. Like we have Deadpool kind of crushing on Elektra, but we have Punisher and Elektra kind of developing their own sort of dysfunctional romantic relationship throughout this book as well. I thought that these little nods and developments were really fascinating. I also liked how Agent Venom was used overall. You get the feeling that he's very uncomfortable with these kinds of missions. He's a soldier. He's not unwilling to use lethal force, and yet he doesn't feel totally kosher about everything going on with this team. And we also deal with a lot of the kind of darker side of his nature with that Venom symbiote and kind of this feeling that he's sort of a cursed character. I think Deadpool was also used fairly well in this. I think his humor was fun. I feel like, I don't want to say they defanged him, but I don't think he was as overpowered or even as outlandish as usual, and maybe that's to his credit. I was never overly annoyed by Deadpool, but I think they could have written him to go a little bit further, both with his humor and his action sequences. And again, he did have his moments too, but I think the Deadpool voice didn't quite hit full on for me, at least in the beginning. As we make our way through the omnibus, though, we eventually get to Charles Soule, who's a writer I've really grown to like quite a bit. Between reading some of his stuff with Star Wars, his run on Daredevil, his series 8 Billion Genies, which I read more recently, I've kind of become a bigger fan of his. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, I think that these are really where this omnibus hits its stride. He basically introduces this mechanic to the storytelling where the function of this team at a certain point is that they're going to draw a name out of a hat for one of the members in the group, and then everyone's going to partake in their mission. And the idea is they're now sticking around after they already kind of dealt with all the stuff for Thunderbolt Ross, presumably. They're going to start sticking around for each other. Like maybe they have their own personal missions or vendettas they outlined, but they can't necessarily execute by themselves. And by helping other people's missions, we are kind of guaranteed that they'll help them on their own individual missions. And I like that dynamic a lot. So we have like a Punisher-based mission. We have a Deadpool kind of based mission, and it's kind of randomized out of the hat. And while we didn't get to see every single member get their turn, I do think that this was a really good storytelling device, and I think it made sense in the context of the team. I think it was a great way to keep the team together and also reveal more about these characters, as a lot of the times their missions were based around something maybe a little bit more personal to them, and I just really dug that. I think that the characters also felt a little bit more like themselves, a little more authentic. I think we got a little bit more of the rough and tumble interactions between the characters I was hoping to see earlier in the omnibus. And admittedly, that could be because this team's now been around for a while, or it could be just because Soule really emphasized that level of characterization. For whatever reason, though, I do think that this is really the aspect of this omnibus I will remember most when I think about this Thunderbolts Red Omnibus. And after that, we eventually kind of wind down with Ben Acker and Ben Blacker taking over for a couple more smaller story arcs that basically ends with the culmination of this team basically disbanding. And along the way, we have a lot of other fun little storylines. There's not a ton of big, epic, overarching stories. We have a couple, like there's this sort of villainous, malevolent presence named Mercy who really wants to be around people who wish for death or wants to be around death. She's like a superpowered being that Thunderbolt Ross doesn't know what to do with. We have the leader kind of slowly gaining his super intelligence back, and all the while plotting to overthrow the team and to kind of destroy everyone. And we kind of have those things that are just sort of simmering in the background of a lot of this run. I think overall these things paid off quite well by the end of the book, but I think beyond that there wasn't any broad epic storyline. There was a lot of just more smaller mission-based stories, and I think that overall that was effective for a title like this. A couple other notable notes for the storylines. We have some interesting tie-ins to the event Infinity, I believe. We have kind of an alien invasion scenario that happens right in the middle of one of the Thunderbolts cases, and this really kind of reroutes their goals. It splinters the team as they each try to have to deal with this in different ways. But I actually think for an event tie-in issue, it wasn't that disruptive to the overall Thunderbolts storytelling. I feel like the writer really maneuvered in such a way that this is an event tie-in, but it also reads fine chronologically in the Thunderbolts order, as you would with this omnibus, which I appreciated. I think if you had no idea what this event was really about or anything, I don't think you'd be missing too much. It just feels kind of thrown in there, I would say. But they are fun. There are kind of some novel issues as well that I enjoyed. Another sequence of issues I really liked, there's one part where they're going through like kind of almost an Amazonian sort of jungle down a river. They're trying to do this mission. I think this one was for Thunderbolt Ross, the Red Hulk. But it has this really cool, like, jungly action movie vibe to it. Like, I felt like I was watching an old like 80s action movie in a way. I thought that was just super effective. I think that the art on that particular story arc was also quite good. There was a kind of almost sci-fi, fantastical aspect to that story as well. But there are some real gems here. Like I said, there's sometimes stories that are a couple issues in length or just kind of a quick runner. But I liked it. I think that overall, some stories are better than others, but when it did hit well. I think that overall, though, I just couldn't escape this feeling like with these characters, I was hoping for maybe just a little bit more. And even though this omnibus isn't overly long, I do feel like you get a lot for the value of this book. And I'm not sure if that's because we have those different writer and artist trade-offs, that I feel like we have different chapters of this run, of this era. So I feel like by the time you read this cover to cover, you've covered a lot of ground. You have a lot of distinct flavors of storytelling. And because of that, I just felt like this was a fuller experience, which I did really like. As far as the art goes, like I said, we had Steve Dillon and we have some other artists I wasn't as familiar with as we go out throughout the book. I think overall, the style they seem to favor for a lot of this omnibus was maybe a little more animated than I expected. Some of them are maybe a little bit more mature art styles. All the art was great. It was all pleasing to the eye, but I think just some of the stylistic choices are so different than others that going from one story arc to another, it can be a bit jarring. So I know some readers that like to have that continuity of experience. When you have a lot of creator shifts, it can be a bit disruptive. And I will say, art-wise, we have the aesthetic change quite a bit issue to issue every so often. So that's something to just be aware of. But I think if you're someone who also is wanting to read comics where you get to know a broader breadth of artistic talent, an omnibus like this is not a bad way to go, where you can see so many different creators and artists attached to it and get a feel for a lot more varied and nuanced art styles. So I do like that, but I think that there wasn't a ton of art in here that blew my mind. There's maybe a couple issues, but overall, I didn't really get this book for the art as much as I got it for the characters. Like I said, I think that was really the driving interest for it. That was one of the reasons I was interested in it. And overall, I would say while it wasn't perfectly executed, I wasn't necessarily let down. I still got to have these great adventures with these characters. I got to satisfy the kind of what if these characters joined together itch. I got to see what they were like in action. And I think overall, that was a very, very fun experience. I think in some ways I was hoping this run would feel a bit more consequential. I think as I'm looking back, even having finished this book maybe a week or two ago, I think that what are going to be my lasting impressions from this run? I think, again, that eclectic, diverse team of characters. I think maybe a couple of those storylines I mentioned earlier. Maybe the romance between Punisher and Elektra. I was really surprised to see that. This is also, for all intents and purposes, my first real time I've spent with the Red Hulk. I was aware that this character existed. I was aware who it was. I've seen him maybe pop up once or twice in comics I've read, but this is the first time I've really spent time with Ross as the Red Hulk, and I found that to be fascinating. But I am curious, for those that are bigger Hulk fans, maybe Red Hulk fans, is this pretty indicative of what this character is like as Red Hulk, or was this maybe written interestingly? Anyway, these are my foundational impressions of Red Hulk as a character, and I wasn't really dissatisfied. It was just a different vision of this character than I maybe expected looking at the character model. It is, for all intents and purposes, just Thunderbolts Ross with his temper kind of being manifest in this hulking form. And I don't know what I expected, but I think I expected it to be a bit different. I do think Punisher was used fairly well in this. I will say as well, I mentioned earlier, I think that there's a parental advisory for this book. As you've seen as I flipped through, that's really just because of violence. There is a lot of blood, there's a lot of death in this. The characters are not afraid to use lethal force. It is that kind of Black Ops, kind of more adult-centric, I guess, superhero or vigilante team. So that's something to be advised as well as you flip through. I think with this roster of characters, that maybe was a little bit expected. And we also get into Ghost Rider at one point, I mentioned. I know sometimes he's a bit of a gnarlier character as well for some people, so just be advised. I do think that this version of Johnny Blaze, I don't know that they did a ton with the character, but I love the character model. I think it looks really fierce and cool. I think Ghost Rider really stole the show whenever he showed up just visually. I will actually say, talking about the art one more time, the high bar for the art in this collection for me was actually the cover art. I think the cover art throughout this entire run on Thunderbolts is absolutely gorgeous. You can almost use them as like posters for your wall. Just absolutely stunning cover art. Some of which you got to see just now in the extras section. We also have some sketches, things like that. But that really brings us to the end of the Thunderbolts Red Omnibus. That was my kind of overview of this title. I have a lot of mixed feelings about this book, but overall I am very happy I read it. It's not like that much I've really read before, to be honest with you. And now all that's left is for me to give the Thunderbolts Red Omnibus a grade. For easily the coolest cast of comic book characters I've ever seen in a team book, and an execution that just always left a little bit more to be desired, the Comic Book Report is happy to give the Thunderbolts Red Omnibus a C+. I do think that this was still an above average read, but my experience throughout this book was a bit inconsistent. It had highs, it had lows, but it didn't have a ton that really stayed with me overall. I think if you enjoy these characters, it might still be worth a pickup, or if you're a Thunderbolts fan, or if the concept just intrigues you. Like I said, there were still moments that really worked for me. I will say in particular, the run by Charles Soule in this book was an absolute highlight for the collection. But maybe I'm missing the mark here. Maybe I'm missing out on other interpretations or readings of this. Let me know what you think of this run on Thunderbolts in the comments. I'd love to hear more from you, maybe start some discussions. And until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to give this video a like, a comment, and maybe share it with a friend. Thanks so much, and have a good one.